It seems like every week there's a new exercise in insanity coming from the state of California. Either a ridiculous quote from one of their keeper of the crazy crypt politicians, or as we've seen frequently in the last year, new legislation or policy. California is now the first sanctuary state, meaning state officials will not help the feds enforce immigration laws in any way. Because as Nancy Pelosi famously told that mom whose son was tortured and killed by an illegal immigrant, a total lack of immigration law actually makes us safer.
These are law-abiding citizens. It enables them to be there without being reported to ICE in case of another crime that they might bear witness to.
Don't forget, California had a travel ban before it was cool. Effective January 1st of this year, California no longer sends anyone on state-sponsored travel to places California deems anti-LGBTQ. That list originally included Kansas, Mississippi, North Carolina, and Tennessee, later expanded to include 4 more. And since many more states have said, hey, cool, how do we get on this list so you never ever send California politicians here either? And last year, California was finally able to tackle the issue long at the top of its legislative docket, making sure cow farts henceforth will be properly monitored and regulated within the Golden State.
By pioneering ways of avoiding the poison of black carbon and methane and fluorocarbons, we build the economy, we create the jobs, we protect our future, and we make ourselves all healthy.
And I hope Jerry Brown smells each one of them personally. And this week, the crazy exported from Sacramento is of the same pure, unrefined quality you've come to expect. And you've probably seen the headlines. California reduces the penalty for knowingly exposing someone to HIV. California changes penalty for knowingly transmitting HIV to sexual partner. Governor signs bill modernizing California HIV laws. Because nothing says modern, cosmopolitan, progressive like a slap on the wrist for knowingly exposing others to infectious immunodeficiency disorders. I thought California politicians only wanted to spread metaphorical AIDS, but it's become quite literal. I'm exaggerating slightly, but this story is so outrageous on first glance, I had to learn more about it to make sure I'm understanding it properly. Once I learned all the details, it's not quite as outrageous as I originally thought, but I'm still miles away from thinking this is anything close to a good idea. Let's talk about what this new law actually does, and then how California's new law fits into the legal landscape of the law in other states, and then talk about what is, in my opinion, some very quirky reasoning from the authors of this bill. To understand this new law, we need to understand what California's old law said. Under existing law, it's a misdemeanor to expose others willfully to communicable diseases generally, except for HIV, which has its own section in the law, making its transmission through unprotected sexual activity a felony if 3 conditions are true. 1, the infector knows at the time that he or she is infected. 2, he or she fails to disclose that infected status. And 3, the infector acts with a specific intent to infect the other person. That's a pretty high bar to clear. That's not just a whoopsie, my bad guys, sorry about the AIDS. To get that felony charge, you have to be HIV positive, you have to withhold that information from your partner, and you have to be purposefully infecting that person. In other words, you have to know exactly what you're doing. Under existing law, it is also a felony to donate blood or tissue if you know you are HIV positive. Also under existing law, anybody convicted of prostitution gets an HIV test. And if that person tests positive and then gets an additional prostitution charge later, that charge can be increased to a felony. So generally speaking, previously in California, if you knew you were HIV positive and then you exposed somebody else to your fluid or tissue without disclosing that HIV positive status, you were committing a felony. Until this new law passed through the California legislature on September 11th and received Governor Jerry Brown's signature on Friday, meaning January 1st, here's what changes. Transmitting all communicable diseases, HIV included, is now a misdemeanor if you know you have the disease, you act with intent to infect, You engage in conduct that poses a substantial risk of transmission, and you actually do transmit the disease. HIV no longer has a unique felony classification. The new law also repeals the old law making the knowing donation of HIV-positive blood or tissue a felony, as well as knowingly HIV-positive prostitution a felony, reducing, as far as I can tell, all possible circumstances of HIV transmission, at least within consensual sex, to misdemeanor status, regardless of what you knew at the time and regardless of whether you acted with intent or negligence. And that still sounds crazy to me, but at least it's consistent. It was a misdemeanor to transmit all other diseases willfully in California. It's just HIV previously had its own special status. Which made me curious, is California really a progressive leader in this area? What are other states' laws on this issue? Much to my surprise, according to this legal analysis, outside of California, only 24 states have laws making the knowing transmission of HIV a felony. In the other half of states, it's either explicitly a misdemeanor or just a sentence enhancer, or there's just no law in the books. That analysis is from 2010, so it's possible that some states have changed their laws in the meantime, but I was surprised to learn that California is by no means unique in this new law. It seems a bit silly for me to rip California for making knowing HIV transmission a misdemeanor, when I now know that same crime here in Montana is also a misdemeanor. But that doesn't mean I think either state has it right, or that the reasoning in California is good reasoning. Now that we know what California's change was, and we know how that change compares to the law in other states, let's consider why California made the change. The bill was written by State Assembly member Todd Gloria and State Senator Scott Wiener. Wiener. The latter of whom says in the official press release upon the bill's signing, "Today, California took a major step toward treating HIV as a public health issue, instead of treating people living with HIV as criminals. But it was never a crime in California simply to be HIV positive. The crime was knowingly transmitting the disease. And by the way, that's still a crime. Under this new law, it's just a lower crime." But their primary reasoning is actually what they describe as encouraging Californians to get HIV tested, or at least eliminating discouragement. Says Assemblymember Gloria, "State law will no longer discourage Californians from getting tested for HIV. With the governor's signature today, we are helping to reduce the stigma that keeps some from learning their HIV status and getting into treatment to improve their health, extend their lives, and prevent additional infections." The thinking here is that since intent is a component of the felony, that was an incentive for people not to get tested for HIV. Because if you don't get tested, you can't know that you're HIV positive. And if you don't know that you're HIV positive, you can't be convicted of the felony. Senator Wiener explains it discourages people from even getting tested for HIV so that the element of intent is not present and they do not risk a felony charge. I suppose that's plausible, but nothing about this change in the law changes that incentive structure. Knowledge of your positive status is still a component of the charge. It's just the charge is now a misdemeanor instead of a felony. The incentive, at least as they explain it, is still not to get tested, since knowing the results of the testing would set you up to break the law in the same way it would have previously. The only point of the bill authors I can see is the point on consistency. Says Senator Wiener, HIV should be treated like all other serious infectious diseases. That's what SB 239 does. I can see the argument that we should just treat all infectious disease transmission equally, but to me, given the seriousness of any disease infection, why not raise them all to felony rather than reducing HIV to misdemeanor? Why should intentional disease infection be a lesser crime than, say, felony battery in California, which can be charged for things like knocking a person out, breaking bones, impairing bodily function, etc. If it's felonious to cause serious bodily harm generally, why shouldn't intentional disease infection qualify? If you give me the choice between getting my ass thoroughly kicked or getting AIDS, You just tell me where you want to punch. I don't want to make accusations of malice without substantial evidence for doing so, but based on the explained justification for this new law, I'm also not satisfied there are good intentions behind passing it and signing it. I'll give credit where due if HIV infections drop significantly in California in the coming years, and I'll take my crow well done with ketchup when the time comes. But for now, I'm adding this to the list of reasons why California's travel ban isn't punitive at all. It's actually a win-win deal for everyone involved. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to come hang out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Okay, bye.